A door found in the Great Pyramid may hold the key to its last great mystery. Patrick Chappuis, Gamma Rapho via Getty Images. Thousands of years after it was built, the Great Pyramid of Giza is still a source of intense fascination today. And the structure continues to hold plenty of secrets, with many of its quirks and features still shrouded in mystery. One such mystery relates to a curious door that sits deep within the pyramid. For generations, nobody knew what lay behind it. Experts have finally discovered the truth. It's difficult to appreciate just how old the Giza pyramids really are. For more than 4,000 years, these structures have stood tall by the River Nile, becoming an enduring symbol of Egypt and its history. Many people have been drawn to them during that time, all trying to wrap their heads around these marvels of engineering.
Before we begin, make sure to smash that like button, subscribe to our channel, and click the notification bell for more amazing videos.
The oldest of the Giza pyramids is known as the Great Pyramid, which was raised to honor a pharaoh named Khufu. The structure is also the biggest in the Giza complex, reaching a height of close to 500 feet. Its sides are around 750 feet in length. The exact methods used to construct the pyramids all those millennia ago still baffle experts. Thanks to the work of historians, though, we know a certain amount about the circumstances in which they were raised. But in terms of the design and construction techniques employed, we're still largely in the dark. Then there are the specific quirks of the pyramids themselves. These structures are strange and confusing, often leaving experts scratching their heads. In the Great Pyramid, for example, there are mysterious doors at the end of two narrow shafts, the purposes of which have been unclear. It was easy to imagine that they led somewhere creepy, and now researchers can finally tell us the truth. As we've heard, researchers have struggled to get to grips with precisely how the ancient Egyptians designed the pyramids. But having said that, we have built up an idea of the wider political and economic circumstances of the civilization that led to their creation. For example, we know some things about the people who did all the hard work. Many of us have grown up under the belief that the pyramids were constructed by slaves. But despite how widely believed that claim is, it turns out there's no evidence to support it. In fact, as best as researchers can tell, the laborers who worked on the structures were paid for their efforts. The people who worked on the pyramids ate well, and they came from across the lands of ancient Egypt. They were housed in a makeshift town close to the construction site, which they'd easily be able to travel to and from. So any suggestion that they were slaves just doesn't bear scrutiny. It seems that settlements dotted throughout Egypt sent people to work on the pyramids, as well as supplying materials for the project. This has led prominent Egyptian archaeologist Zahi Hawass to formulate a theory. He suggested that, rather than the civilization giving rise to the pyramids, it was the structures themselves that helped to construct ancient Egyptian society. But even though the pyramids brought workers in from all across Egypt, they were still built for one person. The pharaohs held the belief that they'd transform into deities when they died. To help this process, they felt they needed to raise elaborate resting places and fill them with objects to aid them in their journey through the afterlife. The pyramids tell us a lot about ancient Egypt, as an Egyptologist named Purter der Manwelian pointed out to National Geographic. Many people think of the site as just a cemetery in the modern sense, he explained. But it's a lot more than that. In these decorated tombs, you have wonderful scenes of every aspect of life in ancient Egypt. So it's not just about how Egyptians died, but how they lived. Artworks discovered inside Egyptian crypts often depict scenes of normal life in the society. For example, you might see a farmer with their animals or out in the fields. Or maybe you'll be given a glimpse into spiritual beliefs and customs. As der Manwelian remarked, almost any subject you want to study about pharaonic civilization is available on the tomb walls at Giza. On top of everything else, the Giza pyramids are iconic, known far and wide. And given its status as the biggest structure in the complex, the Great Pyramid of Giza is probably the most famous. For thousands of years, in fact, it was the highest man-made construction on Earth, before the Eiffel Tower took its mantle in 1889. and it was less than a decade earlier that the Great Pyramid of Giza had finally been investigated in a modern fashion. This occurred in 1880, led by a British researcher named Sir William Matthew Flinders Petrie. Enchanted by the monument, Flinders Petrie later wrote of it, "The Great Pyramid has lent its name as a sort of byword for paradoxes, and as moths to a candle, so are theorizers attracted to it." In terms of its construction, the Great Pyramid was built up using a vast amount of stone slabs. More than 2 million of these blocks were used during construction, each of which was huge and extremely heavy. And just how ancient workers managed to lift and place these rocks is something that still baffles experts today. Of course, numerous theories have been posited in an attempt to explain the construction of the pyramids, but none have proven definitive. One, for example, suggests that the huge stone blocks were brought to the top of the pyramid with the help of ramps rising up its sides. That might sound promising, but most researchers have now dismissed it as a fantasy. Because nobody's ever managed to convincingly explain the process behind the pyramid's construction, there's also been an opportunity for more wacky hypotheses to flourish. The most famous of these beliefs, perhaps, is the idea that the structures were raised by aliens from another planet. To some people, that explains why we can't figure out the methods employed in their construction. And it isn't just the mystery of how the enormous exteriors of the pyramids were built that captures these eccentric theorizers' imaginations. Inside the buildings, too, there are plenty of oddities that nobody's yet been able to explain. In the Great Pyramid alone, rooms such as the Grand Gallery, King's Chamber, and Queen's Chamber all pose questions that still need to be answered. The Grand Gallery is a passageway that connects the King's and Queen's chambers. It's an extremely long and confined space, which surely isn't the most pleasant place for claustrophobic individuals to experience. One might even begin to feel like the small gap between the walls is closing in on them. At one end of the Grand Gallery, you'll eventually reach a trio of pink granite slabs. These mark the entrance to the King's Chamber, another space that isn't exactly roomy. It spans 35 feet by 17 feet, though it has a tall ceiling shooting up almost 20 feet from the ground. It may be the case that the room was intended to hold the remains of a pharaoh, but that isn't certain. The King's Chamber is a marvel of engineering in its own right, given the ingenuity of its design. The space has to withstand intense pressure because of the vast weight of the stone above it. But the ancient Egyptians came up with a brilliant way of dealing with this issue, so just a single fracture has ever appeared in the whole 4,000-year history of the structure.